The galaxy was vast, filled with countless species that had long dominated the stars. Empires, alliances, and civilizations that had been built over millennia had shaped the universe into an intricate web of power and influence. These species had their strengths, immense size, powerful weapons, ancient wisdom, and each thought they had the universe figured out. Then there was humanity, a young species from a small blue planet called Earth, with technology that was still in its infancy compared to the ancient races of the galaxy. But humans had something that none of the other species had ever truly understood, something that set them apart, something that made them dangerous. Humanity was unpredictable. It wasn't that they lacked strength. No, they could fight when necessary. But what truly made them a force to be reckoned with was their refusal to be controlled and their sheer willpower. It started innocently enough, in a small corner of the galaxy, with a diplomatic mission. Earth had been sending ambassadors to neighboring systems for years, trying to build relationships with alien species and form trade alliances. Most of these negotiations were uneventful, filled with polite nods and exchanged documents. Nothing to write home about. But this time, Earth was about to learn a lesson that no one could have anticipated. The galaxy's most powerful empire, the Entar Dominion, had invited a human delegation to their homeworld to discuss potential trade agreements. The Entar were an ancient race, their cities built on towering spires that scraped the skies. They were known for their ruthlessness, their cunning, and their ability to dominate weaker species. The Entar saw themselves as the natural rulers of the galaxy, a belief that had been unchallenged for centuries. They didn't just hold power, they took it. The human delegation, led by Captain Sarah Ellis, arrived on the Entar homeworld with little more than the hope of securing a peaceful trade agreement. They had no illusions about how powerful the Entar were, but they believed in one simple truth. Earth had something to offer that the Entar needed, something no one could ignore. The first few hours of the meeting were uneventful. The Entar leaders, with their shimmering, almost translucent skin and piercing eyes, studied the human representatives carefully, sizing them up. They saw humans as weak, naive, and easily manipulated. This attitude was clear in the dismissive tone of the Entar diplomat who spoke to Captain Ellis. "They are curious, these humans," the diplomat said, waving a clawed hand in the air. "Perhaps we'll indulge them for a while, but remember, we are doing them a favor. You must not forget that." Captain Ellis held her composure, though she could feel the weight of the Entar's condescension. She had faced worse. But the more the Entar spoke, the more the disdain grew. They mocked human technology, belittled Earth's capabilities, and implied that humanity's place in the galaxy was nothing more than to be subjugated, like every other species the Entar had encountered. After several hours of this treatment, the human delegation began to grow uneasy. Earth's delegation was polite, but polite could only go so far. The constant ridicule, the dismissal of their efforts, something inside Captain Ellis snapped. It wasn't supposed to go this way. Earth had come in good faith, hoping to build a partnership. They were offering advanced technologies, resources, and new strategies for energy production. But the Entar had no interest in that. They only wanted to use the humans, to take everything they could and discard them once they were done. They were used to bending others to their will. They were used to being feared. Captain Ellis stood up slowly, her face calm but her eyes sharp with purpose. She had endured countless insults, but this was the moment that changed everything. She wasn't going to let her people be pushed around anymore. Not by the Entar. Not by anyone. The room went silent as Captain Ellis spoke, her voice steady but carrying a strength that few in the galaxy would ever understand. "Now, I'm actually getting annoyed," she said, the words crisp and final. For a moment, no one moved. The Entar didn't even seem to register the words, but as the silence stretched on, something shifted. The Entar diplomat Korath stood frozen, blinking as though he had misheard her. "Excuse me," he asked, clearly taken aback. Captain Ellis didn't repeat herself. She didn't need to, her presence, her demeanor spoke volumes. The room was suddenly filled with a tension none of the Entar had expected. They had encountered many species before, species that would grovel, beg for mercy, or try to bargain. But this was different. The human standing before them wasn't afraid. She wasn't backing down. She wasn't playing their game. As the seconds ticked by, the Entar began to shift uncomfortably. The room, once filled with their arrogant presence, felt smaller. The fear wasn't obvious, but it was there, hidden beneath the surface. Captain Ellis took a slow step forward. She was calm, composed, but there was an undeniable power in her gaze. "Let me make one thing perfectly clear," she continued, her voice firm. "You don't get to treat us like this. You don't get to ignore us, belittle us, or try to control us. You're not the only ones who can stand up to pressure." Korath's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, Captain Ellis pressed a button on her communicator. The ship's internal alarms began to blare. "We've made a mistake," she said, her tone colder than before. "We're leaving, and trust me, the next time you try to make a deal with us, you'll remember this moment." The Entar were stunned. They had expected Earth to cower, to apologize, to beg for another chance. But instead, they had been given a glimpse of something they could not control: humanity's defiance. This wasn't just about being strong. It was about being unpredictable. It was about standing up when no one expected you to. And in that moment, the Entar understood something they never thought possible. Humanity wasn't just going to play their game. Captain Ellis and her team left the Entar council chamber without a backward glance. As they boarded their ship, there was a silence among the crew, one filled with disbelief and pride. They had done it. They had stood their ground against the most powerful empire in the galaxy. Back on Earth, the news of the human delegation's encounter with the Entar spread quickly. And in the corridors of power across the galaxy, the name Captain Ellis began to be whispered with a new tone, one that wasn't filled with ridicule, but with respect and maybe even fear. Humanity had done what no one had expected. They had broken the mold, and in doing so, had earned something more valuable than just respect. They had earned the galaxy's attention. And from that day forward, whenever the phrase, "Now I'm actually getting annoyed," was uttered by a human, every species in the galaxy knew what came next. A force like humanity's had never been seen before. And once they were done being patient, nothing in the galaxy could stop them. The echoes of Captain Ellis's words rippled through the galaxy like a shockwave. The Entar, once proud of their status as the galaxy's dominant force, now found themselves scrambling to recover from an unexpected blow. But it wasn't just the Entar who were affected. Every species that had once dismissed humanity as an insignificant, fragile race began to reconsider their views. And some began to worry. On Earth, the news spread fast. The human delegation had stood their ground against the Entar, and for the first time, the galaxy took notice. No one could have predicted that the humans, with their relatively recent arrival on the galactic stage, would have the courage to challenge an empire as vast and ruthless as the Entar Dominion. The moment the broadcast was released, humanity became the talk of the galaxy. In the corridors of power, the galaxy's leaders began to speak of Earth with a mixture of wariness and intrigue. The Council of the Galactic Order, the ruling body of the most powerful species in the galaxy, convened in an emergency meeting. Representatives from the Zorathians, the Kralrath, and the Yadari, all of whom had historically aligned themselves with the Entar, gathered in one chamber. They had seen the human resolve firsthand, and the implications were clear. "They've done what we never thought possible," a Kralrath representative said, his voice thick with disdain. "They stood up to the Entar without flinching. We should have wiped them out when we had the chance." The Zorathian leader, a tall and imposing figure, nodded slowly. "And now the galaxy knows they can't be controlled. We underestimated them." One of the Yadari officials, her mind a network of interlinked thoughts, chimed in. "What's more concerning is the reaction from their people. Humans don't bow. They don't show fear. If their leaders can show such power, imagine what they could do if they were united." A tense silence filled the room as each representative realized the truth. Humanity had just become a wild card in the grand scheme of the galaxy, a force that couldn't be contained, no matter how hard the Council tried to suppress it. Back on Earth, President Marquez addressed her people. The galaxy was watching, but she knew the victory was only the beginning. The Entar believed we were weak. They thought we would bend, but we've shown them what happens when humans stand together. We fight for each other and we fight for our freedom. This is only the beginning of our journey. The room was filled with applause. The people of Earth had never felt more united. The seeds of defiance had been planted, and the fire of rebellion was spreading. The victory against the Entar wasn't just a momentary triumph. It was the spark that would ignite the hearts of countless species across the stars. However, not everyone in the galaxy saw humanity stand as a victory for freedom. There were those who saw it as a direct threat to their power. The Entar, humiliated by their defeat, began to regroup. They were not the kind of empire that simply accepted defeat. They would find a way to reassert their dominance, and the humans were at the top of their list. The Entar's response was swift. They began recruiting allies, seeking to restore their influence over the galaxy. The Entar fleet, once feared and revered, was now poised to strike back. But the galaxy had changed. The balance of power had shifted. The Entar weren't the only ones watching humanity anymore. Others were starting to listen. Days after the announcement, the first group of species began to approach Earth, seeking alliances. The Kralrath, once bitter enemies of humanity, were the first to make contact. They had long sought to undermine the Entar but had never had the means. Now, after watching humans stand up to them, they saw an opportunity to forge an alliance. "We are not interested in fighting your war," the Kralrath ambassador said, his tone cautious but firm. "But we believe your fight is worth supporting. The Entar's strength is built on fear, and you've shown us that there is a way to defy them." The Zorathians, known for their vast intelligence and technological prowess, were the second to reach out. Their leader, a calculating figure known as Velantra, appeared on Earth's communication screens. "You've broken the mold," she said. "The Entar have manipulated us for too long. It's time we stand with you. If you can defeat the Entar, you can lead us to a new era." Humanity's position in the galaxy was no longer fragile. It was growing stronger by the day. Species that had once looked down on Earth now saw the humans as their potential liberators. As the days turned into weeks, Captain Sarah Ellis, the very same diplomat who had stood up to the Entar, found herself leading a new initiative, one that would not only secure Earth's future, but also forge a path toward a new intergalactic alliance. The humans had earned their place, and now they would lead the charge for freedom across the galaxy. "The galaxy has underestimated us," Captain Ellis said in her address to the United Galactic Coalition. "But now, we're going to show them that humanity isn't just a species of survivors. We are builders, we are leaders, and we will be the ones to shape the future of the stars." Meanwhile, the Entar were scrambling to respond. Their attempts to regroup had stalled as more species began joining humanity's cause. The Entar fleet, once a symbol of fear, was now seen as a force that could be challenged. As their enemies grew in number, the Entar began to realize the truth. Humanity had become the fulcrum on which the fate of the galaxy would turn. As Captain Ellis stood on the balcony of the New Earth headquarters looking out over the city below, she couldn't help but feel the weight of what they had accomplished. Humanity had proven itself, but as she looked up at the stars, she knew the path ahead was just beginning. The galaxy was shifting, and humanity was at the center of it. They had shown their strength, their resolve, and their unity. And now it was time to take that message to the stars. The word was out. When humans say, "Now I'm actually getting annoyed," every species in the galaxy should be worried. Because when humanity gets angry, it's not just a fight they start, it's a revolution. The galaxy was changing. Slowly but surely, humanity's defiance had become a spark that was lighting fires across the stars. What began as a single phrase, "Now I'm actually getting annoyed," had turned into a rallying cry. Captain Sarah Ellis's stand against the Intar had been more than just a victory. It had been a declaration that humanity would no longer bow to any empire, no matter how powerful. And it was a declaration that resonated across countless worlds. As the alliance between humanity, the Kralrath, and the Zorathians grew stronger, the once dominant Intar began to feel the weight of the change. They had underestimated humans. They had thought that their size, their power, and their centuries of dominance would keep them in control. But now, humanity was stirring something in the galaxy that the Intar couldn't stop. Hope. On Earth, President Marquez stood before a massive screen, her eyes scanning the reports from the newly formed Galactic Coalition. It was a fragile alliance, to be sure. Many species, though grateful for humanity's leadership, were still hesitant. After all, the galaxy had never seen a species rise to challenge the Intar, let alone defeat them. But now the coalition was more than just a symbol. It was a living, breathing force, and the Intar were trembling. "We've gathered forces from dozens of worlds," President Marquez said, turning to the council of military leaders and diplomats. "But this is just the beginning. Our success against the Intar was just the first step. We need to move quickly before they regroup." General Hale nodded in agreement. "They will. The Intar are not a species to sit idle when they're challenged. We have to push forward or we risk losing everything we've gained." Ray Mitchell, a key member of the coalition, stepped forward. She had been with Captain Ellis during the Intar confrontation, and her fiery spirit had become a symbol of humanity's strength. "The Council can't afford to be complacent. They've shown their hand, and now we need to play ours. Every hour we wait, the Intar grows stronger." President Marquez's expression hardened. "Then we'll make sure they don't have the chance." Elsewhere in the far reaches of the galaxy, the Intar were furiously regrouping. Their once invincible empire was now crumbling bit by bit as more species defected to the growing rebellion. Their once unified fleet was now scattered and disorganized, and for the first time in centuries, they found themselves at a loss. Korath, the Intar diplomat who had once dismissed the humans as nothing more than a nuisance, stood at the heart of the Intar command center, his eyes burning with anger. "How could this happen?" he roared, slamming his fist onto the control panel. "How could we let a species like humanity, humans, ruin everything?" The fleet admiral, a towering figure with scales as hard as metal, stood silently before him. "They are not what we thought," she said, her voice grim. "The humans, they fight differently. They don't fear us, and that is something we have never encountered." Korath's mind raced. For centuries, the Intar had dominated the galaxy by instilling fear. Fear was their weapon. It was how they had maintained control over countless worlds. But humanity's defiance, their refusal to cower, had shattered that weapon. It had forced the galaxy to see them for what they truly were, not weak, not insignificant, but dangerous. "We will not be defeated by this insubordination," Korath muttered. "We'll crush them. We'll crush every last one of them." But deep down, he knew something that made his skin crawl. The more he thought about humanity, the more he realized that they weren't the ones who would break. It was the Intar who were unraveling. On the battlefield, humanity's new allies were proving their worth. The Kralrath had adapted quickly, using their advanced technology to disrupt the Intar's supply lines and communications. The Zorathians, with their vast intelligence, had provided critical insights into the Intar's tactics, allowing the human forces to anticipate their movements with deadly precision. Humanity's fighters were everywhere now. They weren't just defending Earth. They were attacking, disrupting, and dismantling the Intar's hold on the galaxy. But it wasn't just about military might. Humanity's real weapon was its heart, its resolve. They fought not just for victory, but for something greater, for freedom, for justice, and for the idea that no one, no matter how powerful, could take that away. Ray Mitchell stood at the command center, staring at the screen as another successful strike flashed across the display. "They're losing ground. It's working," she said, her voice filled with quiet determination. President Marquez smiled slightly. "It is, but we can't stop yet. The Ntar won't give up without a fight. We need to make sure we finish what we started." "We will," Ray said, her eyes hardening, "but we do it on our terms." As the weeks passed, the rebellion grew. New alliances formed. Former enemies joined the cause. The galaxy was no longer the domain of the Ntar. Humanity's refusal to back down had ignited something in the stars, a movement that could no longer be stopped. But as the rebellion spread, so did the Ntar's desperation. They weren't used to losing, and now they had no idea how to deal with a force that wouldn't bend to their will. They tried everything they could to suppress the uprising. They deployed new weapons, launched brutal attacks on neutral systems, and tried to choke off the rebellion by isolating Earth. But every time they struck, humanity struck back harder. The final battle came sooner than anyone expected. The Ntar, in their desperation, launched a full-scale assault on Earth itself, believing that if they could take the heart of the rebellion, they could destroy it once and for all. Their fleet was massive, the largest they had ever assembled, but the humans were ready. They had anticipated this move, and they had planned for it. Captain Ellis, standing on the bridge of the Resolute Dawn, looked out at the enemy fleet as it approached. Her crew was tense, but they were ready. She could feel it in the air. The galaxy had already changed, and this battle would be the final confirmation. They had nothing left to fear. "Now I'm actually getting annoyed," she whispered to herself, the words that had started it all ringing in her ears. The Ntar had thought they were unbeatable, but humanity had proved them wrong time and time again. And now, the final blow was about to be struck. As the battle raged across the stars, the Ntar realized the truth. They had underestimated humanity from the very beginning. The fight wasn't about strength. It wasn't about technology. It was about spirit. And in that, humanity had no equal. The Ntar fleet was driven back. The Alliance was victorious. And as the smoke cleared and the stars once again shone brightly above Earth, it was clear. Humanity had claimed its place in the galaxy. No longer would they be seen as weak, as naive. They had shown the galaxy what happened when humans said, "Now I'm actually getting annoyed." Battle for Earth was over, but the aftermath left the galaxy reeling. Humanity's victory over the Ntar Dominion was not just a military win. It was a statement, a message to every species across the stars. Humanity will not be controlled. No longer would they be seen as a fledgling species, naive and easily dominated. The galaxy's most powerful empire had tried to break them, and instead, humanity had torn their oppressors down. But with that victory came the realization that the fight was far from over. The Ntar fleet had retreated, but their humiliation would not be easily forgotten. The remnants of their empire were still vast, and their anger would fuel their desire for revenge. Across the galaxy, the Council, the collective of species that had long upheld the Ntar's rule, began to take action. They couldn't afford to let humanity's rebellion spread any further. On Earth, President Marquez addressed the people, her voice steady but filled with the weight of what they had just accomplished. "We have shown the galaxy what humanity is capable of, but now the real work begins. This victory is not just for us. It is for all those who have been oppressed, but if we are to build something new, we must stand together, united, strong, and unyielding." The response from the people was overwhelming. Crowds gathered in every city, celebrating the victory, but there was no sense of complacency. Humans had fought for their freedom, but the galaxy would not let them keep it without a fight. As the cheers rang out, a somber understanding settled in. The Ntar would return, and when they did, humanity would have to be ready. Ray Mitchell, who had been on the front lines of the rebellion, was no longer just a soldier. She had become a symbol. She had faced down the Ntar and led humanity through its darkest hours, but she knew that what was coming would be far more dangerous than anything they had faced before. The galaxy was starting to unite against them, and Earth needed to prepare. In the war room, as the strategy maps flickered across the screens, General Hale looked at Ray, his face drawn. The Intar might have retreated, but their allies won't. The Kralreth, the Yadari, the Zorathians, they're all starting to gather. We've made an enemy of the galaxy's most powerful forces, and they won't forget that easily. Ray nodded, her thoughts running deep. We need to hit them where it hurts. We need to build alliances, real ones. If we wait for them to come to us, we're done. Across the galaxy, in the council chambers of the Galactic Order, discussions were underway. The news of humanity's victory had spread like wildfire, but it wasn't received with admiration. It was received with fear. The galaxy's ruling powers, species that had lived in the shadow of the Intar's rule, were now being forced to confront the truth. Humanity was a threat. The Kralreth ambassador, still skeptical after their previous encounters, was the first to speak. We cannot allow this rebellion to grow. The Intar may have faltered, but we must act now before humanity rallies the galaxy to its cause. If they gain momentum, the galaxy will be theirs. The Yadari representative, a species known for its cold, calculating logic, interjected. Humanity is unpredictable. Their victory wasn't just about their strength, it was about their will. We've never seen a species fight like this. If we leave them unchecked, they will challenge everything we've built. The Zorathian leader, known for her wisdom, spoke next. We cannot ignore this. If the humans have the ability to unite and lead others against us, we will lose everything. It's not just their strength, it's their unity. We cannot afford to underestimate them. The decision was made quickly. The Galactic Order, a loose coalition of powerful species that had once stood behind the Intar's rule, would now band together to suppress humanity's uprising before it could grow. But what they didn't realize was that humanity wasn't just reacting to an empire anymore. They were leading something far greater. The victory over the Intar had inspired countless species across the galaxy to rise up. The rebellion wasn't confined to Earth. It was everywhere. As the forces of the Galactic Order began to gather, the rebellion grew in strength. Every species that had suffered under the Intar's rule found new courage in humanity's actions. The Kralreth, once bitter enemies of humanity, had seen their own opportunities. They joined the cause not out of friendship, but because they wanted to see the Intar fall. The Zorathians, whose intellect had once kept them neutral, now offered their knowledge and their technology to the cause. And then there were the silent ones, the civilians, the species who had once bowed to the Intar but now whispered of rebellion. The galaxy had been watching humanity, and now they were choosing sides. For the first time, the oppressed had a voice. Back on Earth, Ray stood with President Marquez, watching as fleets from allied species arrived to aid in the coming struggle. The numbers were growing, but so were the stakes. The galaxy's most powerful empires were preparing for all-out war. The rebellion had spread far beyond Earth, and now they had to stand ready for the battle that would decide the fate of the galaxy. The war is about to escalate, President Marquez said, her eyes scanning the view screen. The Intar may have retreated, but their allies are coming. We don't have time to hesitate. Ray's jaw tightened. We're not going to wait for them to hit us first. We strike first. We hit their supply lines, their communication hubs. We cripple them before they can bring their full force to bear. Marquez nodded. You're right, we have one shot at this. The battle began with a sudden strike at the heart of the Galactic Order's fleet. The humans and their allies, united like never before, attacked in waves, striking the enemy's weakest points and pulling back before they could retaliate. The fight wasn't about strength anymore. It was about strategy. It was about making the enemy react, about keeping them on the back foot. Each attack was calculated. Each move was deliberate. And every time the enemy regrouped, humanity hit again. The Intar, now weakened, struggled to keep up. Their fleets were disorganized, their morale shattered by the fact that they had been defeated by a species they once thought beneath them. In the heat of the conflict, Captain Ellis led a final assault, an attack on the Intar flagship, the Imperia. The Intar had believed that they could control the galaxy by maintaining their command center, but now it was humanity's turn to show the galaxy who held the true power. The final strike hit hard. The Imperia was crippled, and the Intar's command network fell apart. It was a blow to the heart of their empire, and with it, the rebellion gained a crucial victory. As the dust settled, the galaxy was irrevocably changed. Humanity's rebellion had become a symbol of defiance, not just for Earth, but for every species that had ever been oppressed. The galaxy was no longer under the thumb of the Intar. The rebellion was no longer just a fight for Earth's survival. It had become a movement, one that no empire, no matter how powerful, could ignore. Humanity had shown the galaxy what happened when they said, "Now I'm actually getting annoyed." They had proven that they weren't just fighting for their freedom. They were fighting for the freedom of every species that had ever been crushed under the heel of tyranny, and they had no intention of stopping now. The galaxy was no longer the same place it had been just months ago. The Intar, once the uncontested rulers of vast star systems, were now on the defensive. Humanity, the species once thought to be weak and insignificant, had risen up to challenge the most powerful empire the stars had ever seen. And in doing so, they had ignited a fire that couldn't be put out. The rebellion had spread like wildfire. It wasn't just about Earth anymore. The oppressed, the downtrodden, the forgotten species across the galaxy had all found new hope in humanity's struggle. They had watched the humans stand up to the Intar and had made the decision to fight for their own freedom. They had decided that the old ways were over. Back on Earth, President Marquez stood before a crowd that filled every corner of the massive arena. The cheers were deafening as humanity's victory in the war against the Intar became the rallying cry for an entirely new age. The war was not yet over, but humanity had changed the course of history. The question now wasn't whether they could defeat the Intar. It was how the galaxy would adapt to the new power structure. "We've shown the galaxy that humanity doesn't bow to anyone. We fight for our freedom, and we stand up for those who cannot fight for themselves," President Marquez said, her voice strong and full of conviction. "But this victory isn't just ours. It belongs to everyone who has suffered under the Intar's rule. This victory belongs to the galaxy." The crowd roared with approval. The message had been clear for some time now. Humanity was no longer just a species on the edge of the galaxy. They were leaders, and as their star was rising, others were beginning to take notice. The Intar, now on the back foot, struggled to regain control. Their once mighty fleets were scattered and broken. Their allies, once loyal, were beginning to look elsewhere. The Kralrath, once the Intar's closest allies, had shifted their support to humanity. The Zorathians, the once neutral scholars of the galaxy, had joined the rebellion, providing critical intelligence and technology. But the most surprising of all were the Yadari, a race known for their cold, calculating minds and their powerful networks. They had always stayed in the shadows, too intelligent and too strategic to be caught up in the galaxy's power struggles. But after witnessing humanity's rise, they realized something. If they didn't join the fight, they might find themselves living in a galaxy where humanity was the dominant force. And so they too had pledged their support. The formation of the Galactic Alliance had begun. It was a coalition of all the species who had thrown their lot in with humanity's cause. Each species, though vastly different, had something to offer, whether it was advanced technology, military power, or intelligence. Together, they were an unstoppable force. The Alliance had already begun to push back against the remnants of the Intar fleet, liberating systems one by one. Ray Mitchell, standing beside President Marquez, watched the reports flooding in. Their strategy was simple but effective: destabilize the remaining Intar strongholds and weaken their resolve. With each victory, the Alliance grew bolder, more confident. Humanity's leadership in the struggle was undeniable, and soon it became clear that the Intar would be driven from their position of power for good. "Every battle we win pushes them closer to the edge," Ray said, her voice calm but filled with determination. "We've broken their will to fight. We've shown them that we will not stop until the galaxy is free." President Marquez nodded. "And now we need to help the galaxy rebuild." The galaxy had been fractured by the Entar's reign. Countless worlds had been left in ruins, their resources drained, their cultures destroyed. Humanity knew that simply defeating the Entar wasn't enough. They had to help those who had suffered, those who had been silenced for so long. The Galactic Alliance's primary goal now was to restore balance, to heal the wounds of centuries of oppression. In the following months, the Alliance began its work. It wasn't just about fighting. It was about rebuilding, about creating a future where no one, human or alien, would be left behind. Earth's scientists, engineers, and diplomats worked tirelessly to help restore the broken worlds, using humanity's advanced technology to help reverse the damage done by the Entar. Captain Ellis, who had been at the forefront of humanity's struggle, now found herself tasked with a new responsibility, leading the newly formed Galactic Peace Corps. It was a division designed to work alongside their allies to maintain peace and prevent the rise of future tyrants. No longer was humanity just fighting to survive. Now, they were building the foundation for a new galaxy. But not everyone was happy with the new order. There were still those who feared the rise of humanity. The Entar, though beaten, were not entirely gone. They still had supporters, remnants of their empire scattered across the stars. And some of the galaxy's more established species, like the Zorathians, wondered whether humanity's newfound power would last. Would they become the very thing they had fought against? Ray Mitchell knew the galaxy wasn't finished with them yet. There would always be those who resisted change. There would always be those who sought to impose their will on others. But humanity had proven something important in the past months. They would not back down. As Ray stood on the balcony of Earth's new command center, watching the stars, she felt the weight of history on her shoulders. The galaxy had changed, and humanity was at the heart of it. They had shown the galaxy what happened when they said, "Now I'm actually getting annoyed." And the galaxy would never forget it. Back in the council chambers of the Galactic Alliance, President Marquez addressed her fellow leaders. The atmosphere was electric, filled with excitement and hope for the future. The war was over, but their work had only just begun. "We have one chance to make this right," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "We have the opportunity to create a galaxy where freedom, equality, and justice are the cornerstones of our future. But we can't do it alone. We need to stand together as one." The room erupted in applause. The once divided galaxy was now united under one cause, the cause of freedom. And at the center of it all was humanity, leading the charge toward a new era. As the applause faded, Ray's eyes drifted to the stars once more. The path ahead was uncertain. There would be struggles, challenges, and enemies to face. But one thing was clear: humanity had changed the course of history. They had shown the galaxy that they would never back down. They would never let anyone oppress them again. And in that moment, Ray knew that humanity's place in the galaxy had been secured. They had risen from the ashes of oppression, and now they were the ones who would shape the future. The victory over the Entar was supposed to mark the end of the war. The galaxy, it seemed, had begun to heal, the wounds of centuries of oppression slowly mending. Humanity had risen, defied the odds, and proven to the galaxy that they were no longer a species to be dismissed. But as the celebrations died down and the reality of peace settled in, a new challenge emerged, one that was far more complex than any battle they had fought before. It wasn't just about defeating an empire anymore. It was about creating something new, something sustainable, something that would last. The galaxy had been forever changed by humanity's defiance, but now the question was, could humanity lead, and could they maintain their newfound place at the heart of the galaxy? President Marquez stood at the helm of Earth's new government, watching as representatives from countless species worked together to build the foundations of a new order. The Galactic Alliance had formed to ensure that the atrocities of the past would never happen again. The Entar had been defeated, but the cracks they left behind were deep, wounds that would take much longer to heal. And while the galaxy was no longer under the thumb of tyranny, Marquez knew they could not afford to rest. She turned to Ray Mitchell, who stood silently beside her, her expression unreadable. As one of humanity's most trusted leaders, Ray had become a symbol of Earth's strength and resilience. "It's not enough to simply defeat the Entar," Marquez said quietly. "We need to build a galaxy that's worth protecting, a galaxy where no species is ever oppressed again." Ray nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "And that means we have to lead by example. We've shown the galaxy what we're capable of. Now we have to show them that we can hold that power responsibly. We can't let the cycle of domination continue." While the leaders of Earth worked to establish peace, the rest of the galaxy was adjusting to this new reality. Some species celebrated humanity's victory, seeing it as the end of centuries of oppression. But others, more cautious, began to question whether the new power dynamics would be any different from the old ones. In the shadows, old alliances were shifting. The Zorathians, once neutral observers, had started to realize that humanity's rise could lead to something greater, but only if it was managed wisely. The Krowrath, on the other hand, had seen Earth's victory as an opportunity to gain more influence for themselves. Not everyone was eager to follow the human-led Galactic Alliance. Some, like the Zeorosians, had always been self-serving, willing to side with whoever had the most power. It was clear that the unity humanity had built would be tested. The galaxy had learned to fear humanity's strength, but now they would see if humanity's leadership could be trusted. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings, Ray found herself alone in the observation room, gazing out at the stars. She could see Earth's reflection in the glass, the blue planet shining brightly against the backdrop of the vast, dark universe. Humanity had done the impossible. They had defied the odds, overcome the Entar, and united the galaxy's fractured species. But that victory came with a responsibility she didn't take lightly. "It's a lot, isn't it?" President Marquez's voice broke through her thoughts, and Ray turned to find the president standing at the entrance of the room. She nodded, her expression somber. "The hardest part isn't winning," Ray replied, her voice soft but firm. "It's leading. We've shown the galaxy that we can fight, but can we guide them through this new era?" Marquez stepped closer. "You've already shown them that we can. The rest of the galaxy looks to us now, Ray. They need someone who will stand firm, who will act with integrity, and who won't let the past repeat itself. It's a heavy burden." Ray turned back to the stars, her gaze unwavering. "I know, but humanity has never backed down from a challenge. If we lead together. We don't forget what we fought for." In the days that followed, the Galactic Alliance began to take shape. The first task was clear: stabilize the systems that had been ravaged by the Entar and help rebuild the economies and societies that had fallen into ruin. But this wasn't just about recovery. It was about creating a new order, one that would be based on cooperation, not fear. Humanity's role was pivotal. They were no longer just a force of resistance. They were now seen as the beacon of hope in a galaxy that had long been ruled by domination and fear. But that came with its own set of challenges. As the leaders of Earth worked to rebuild relationships with the other species, they began to see just how fragile the alliances were. Old grudges, political maneuvering, and the thirst for power still simmered beneath the surface. Ray and President Marquez knew they couldn't simply hope that peace would last. They needed to work tirelessly to ensure that the galaxy didn't fall back into its old ways. Earth had already proven that they were a force to be reckoned with. Now, they had to prove they could lead in a way that would unite the galaxy, not divide it. As Ray traveled across the galaxy to meet with various leaders and sign treaties, she saw the fear in the eyes of some of the species. They had seen the destruction the Entar could cause, and now they were wondering if humanity's rise would bring about a new era of chaos. Would Earth become another empire, one that ruled through fear and intimidation? Or would humanity rise above its past mistakes and build something truly lasting? Ray was determined to show them the latter. She knew it wouldn't be easy. There were too many forces that still wanted control, too many species that couldn't shake the old way of thinking. But humanity had already done the impossible. They had overthrown an empire. They had shown the galaxy their strength. Now, it was time to prove their wisdom. Back on Earth, President Marquez stood before the United Galactic Council, addressing the representatives of the various species who had gathered. She knew that her words could either cement humanity's role as leaders or turn the galaxy against them. "We are not here to dominate," she said, her voice strong and confident. "We are here to build. We are here to heal. The galaxy has been through too much to let fear and power dictate our future. It's time for a new path, a path where we all stand together, where every voice is heard, and where no one is left behind." The room fell silent as the representatives considered her words. There were still some who doubted humanity's intentions, but in that moment, Marquez knew they had taken the first step toward a future where the galaxy could truly thrive. As the days turned to weeks, the new order began to take shape. The Entar were no longer the shadow hanging over the galaxy. The rebellion had sparked a movement, and humanity's leadership was slowly beginning to win the respect of those who had once seen them as nothing more than a nuisance. But the true test had only just begun. Ray Mitchell stood once more, looking at the stars, knowing that humanity's journey wasn't over. The galaxy had seen what humans could do when they fought for freedom. Now, it was time to show them what humanity could achieve when they fought for peace. And Ray was ready to lead them every step of the way.